another LARP called Vampire: The Masquerade. In this game, players pretended to be vampires who were pretending to be human. The game met at the University of Texas at Austin, and most of the players were college students. Players had to be 18, so I lied about my age in order to participate. Whereas Amtgard had been loud, violent, and sweaty, Vampire consisted primarily of elaborate Machiavellian plots, and most characters wore suits instead of chainmail. LARPing was an alternative world in which my normal adolescent life was reversed. In high school, I generally avoided the gym. In Amtgard, I dealt death from the shadows. In high school, I did not talk to many girls. In Vampire, I discussed philosophy and politics with female college students in leather corsets. Experiencing this alternative world caused me to think about the ordinary world in new ways. The pummeling I received in Amtgard taught me that I could be tough. In college, I began studying martial arts and eventually took up boxing and weight training. These skills gave me the confidence to work with at-risk youth as a high school teacher, and I briefly coached boxing. Vampire taught me about networking, resourcefulness, and cunning. Every graduate student would be well served by playing Vampire before attending his or her first academic conference. I was able to discover these things through LARPing precisely because these games seemed more real than playing D&D with friends. The high level of organization and the number of people involved meant that my actions had consequences within the alternate reality of the game that forced me to think carefully about what I was doing. The freedom to take risks without suffering permanent consequences when I made mistakes taught me confidence and helped me to grow up. However, living in Texas, I was also aware that my hobbies marked me as deviant. In middle school, I was occasionally bullied for playing D&D, and a neighbor's father was convinced that Amtgard was a satanic cult. In fact, bullies and evangelical Christians seemed to be in lockstep regarding D&D. In the 1980s, there was a full-blown moral panic over role-playing games in which such figures as Geraldo Rivera and Tipper Gore warned that games like D&D cause young people to lose their minds, commit suicide, and worship the devil. Gamers, those who play fantasy role-playing games, were simultaneously the object of ridicule and fear. Somehow, we were perceived as hapless losers who were also dangerous Satanists. As a child, listening to sensational claims about my favorite hobby led me to my first suspicion that grown-ups are fallible. Adults claimed that their authority came from their experience and wisdom, and yet a simple game made them frightened and hysterical. One experience of anti-gaming hostility had a particularly lasting impression on me. In the 6th grade, I was discussing the game with a friend when an older student overheard our conversation and began berating us. "You worship gods from books," he cried with disgust. "That's just sad." A hostile debate ensued in which he repeated several times that we worshipped gods from D&D books. Although I was not able to properly articulate it as a 6th grader, especially to a larger and more aggressive student, I understood that there were several layers of irony in the accusation that D&D players worship gods from books. First, D&D was a game, not a religion. It had nothing to do with worshiping anything. Second, the pantheon of gods in our D&D games was imaginary, not real. We knew the gods were imaginary because we had made them up. Third, and most importantly, there was nothing unusual about worshiping gods from books. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all worship a god that they have come to know primarily through a sacred text. The bully, who made it clear that he had the full support of his church in condemning our hobby, most certainly worshipped a god from a book. This encounter caused me to suspect that the attack on fantasy role-playing games was fueled by deep-seated fears and desires that the attackers themselves